Hello and welcome. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. Today we are here to celebrate the launch of a remarkable book, Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You, by Atlantic Council Ambassador in Residence, Capricia Marshall. She was the White House Chief of Protocol for President Barack Obama and was also, before that, White House Social Secretary to President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. You'll also hear from our Executive Vice Chair of the Atlantic Council Board in a moment, Adrienne Arsht, businesswoman, philanthropist extraordinaire, founder of the Atlantic Council Latin America Center, and of the Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. Oh, and by the way, of her many contributions, she also brought Ambassador Marshall to the Atlantic Council, but you can read about that in the book on page 363. Adrienne will introduce, for her remarks, Ambassador Susan Rice. Susan Rice was the National Security Advisor to President Obama, one of America's leading thinkers and actors on international policy, and we're also happy to say that she was a former Atlantic Council board member. Before we get started, I may be coming to the most important part of this program, which is buy the book, and then read the book. I may be dropping out of protocol, Capricia, by trying to sell the book this early in the program, but you always talk about how you have to have a knowledge of the environment. I think this is an environment where that will work. You'll see in the chat room of Zoom how you can buy it at Politics and Prose, and then you would get a signed copy. And of course, you can go to Amazon as well, or the Politics and Prose website. For the many on this call who know Capricia, you've long known that through operating at the very highest levels of government, and that also means at the highest levels of international affairs, she has applied the lessons she teaches us in this book, that there is power in detail, nuance, and etiquette. Indeed, she argues, protocol is a hidden superpower. In the words of Secretary Hillary Clinton, protocol, her book Protocol is a must-read, taking us behind the curtain of the highest levels of diplomacy, teaching us lessons about the intersection of governing and humanity that we need now more than ever, end quote. So at this point, let's get started, and I'd like to pass the stage to the inimitable Adrienne Arsht.
Thank you, Fred. When Capricia was about to leave her job at the State Department, I asked her, so now what? Now where? And she said, I want to write a book. And I said, well, then the where will be at the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. After all, that's what guys do. They go to a think tank or a policy shop and they write a book. And so Capricia came to the Atlantic Council, and today we celebrate the publication of that book. Now, Fred has told you a lot about Capricia's technical history, job history. She was, from 2009 to 2013, Chief of Protocol to President Barack Obama, with the rank of ambassador. Now, while Capricia was busy writing this book, she also played a pivotal role in carrying out the work of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. As a first-generation American of Mexican and Croatian descent, Capricia has used her background to foster international goodwill and cultivate relationships across business, culture, and foreign diplomacy. Through her remarkable career in diplomacy and global affairs, Capricia reinvented modern protocol and set the stage for successful global engagements. Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You, is Capricia's book about her 12 years in the White House and as Chief of Protocol. She shares wonderful anecdotes that show us all the importance of protocol and diplomacy. And now, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Ambassador Rice. Her comments from her vast experience in so many posts will contextualize the importance of this book amidst today's challenges. Ambassador Rice, welcome.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to honor my friend and former colleague, Capricia Marshall, whom, as you all know, served as White House Social Secretary in the Clinton administration and as the US Chief of Protocol in the Obama administration. What you all don't know is that Capricia is also my neighbor, a very close neighbor. And during the coronavirus pandemic, we've run into each other on a number of occasions on a neighborhood tennis court and on walks with our husbands, of course, properly socially distanced, with all that protocol in mind. It's been remarkable to watch Capricia navigate a book launch in the virtual world. She does that with the grace and the finesse with which she does everything. As I think of the current state of the world, I realize that at no point in our recent history have we had a more urgent need for diplomacy and protocol. With no clear end in sight, the coronavirus pandemic has caused a global health and economic crisis. But at a personal level, it's also changed every aspect of our daily lives and how we relate to each other. Now more than ever, respect and protocol matter. Wearing a mask in public is the most basic and obvious example of why etiquette and mutual respect are so important today, and of how small individual actions can have a huge impact on the larger society. Indeed, at a time where basic civility seems to be endangered, Capricia's new book, Protocol: The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You, reminds us that relationship building, multicultural awareness, and good manners matter greatly. I'm fortunate to have worked with Capricia both in the Clinton and the Obama administrations. That's how old we are. And as some of you may remember, these were times in which engagement with the world and setting an example for democracy were still priorities for our government. Capricia and I traveled the world together on official visits and working visits, and we also welcomed foreign delegations to the United States. While I served as US ambassador to the United Nations, I often hosted foreign diplomats at our residence in New York, including often at the request of Capricia. During these years, I witnessed how soft power and cultural impact, and through these powerful tools, Capricia laid the groundwork for successful diplomacy and international engagement. As the White House Social Secretary and later Chief of Protocol, Capricia's behind-the-scenes preparations played an important role in many of President Clinton and President Obama's foreign policy achievements. Although this is not the reality that we live in right now, protocol is important for policy. We simply cannot forget that, and we can't allow the younger generations to forget that. And that's why Capricia's book is such an invaluable tool at this time. Her book presents excellent lessons in soft power, along with some very funny and relatable anecdotes that can help us navigate situations in politics and our personal lives, tools that we need now more than ever. So please buy this book, read this book, and give it to everyone you know. Through protocol, we can alter our lives for the better. Through proper etiquette and good manners, as we all try to teach our children, we can influence outcomes to our advantage. Capricia herself is an excellent example of how this works. And with that, I'm pleased to hand over the conversation to Fred and Capricia so you can hear from Capricia herself about her 2 decades in the White House.
What a wonderful beginning, Ambassador Rice. That was just terrific. And I think it really put in context the meaning of the book, but also celebrated the person who wrote it. So thank you so much for that. And Adrienne, also just a wonderful welcome from you as well. And thanks again for bringing Capricia to us. So let me start from the beginning, Capricia. And that was what Adrienne was talking about, which is your beginnings as the daughter of a Mexican-born mother Croatian-born father. My guess is you didn't go to the playground and say, someday I hope to be White House Chief of Protocol. But tell us how those childhood years shaped you and put you into some sort of a trajectory that we now see.
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you, Fred. Thank you so very much for hosting this wonderful convening about my book and for all of your incredibly flattering words and support. I would like to take you and Adrienne and Susan on the road with me as I virtually launch my book. You all have just made me feel so incredibly wonderful this afternoon, and you're doing a fantastic job at selling it. Thank you, thank you. I also just want to say thank you to you, Fred, for your leadership at the council. You do with this think tank, and I mean do, because it is a do tank. Every day you push us forward, great changes. It's just such an honor to be a part of your operation. And Adrienne gave me that wonderful perch. I'm forever, ever grateful to her. That lunch that we had will stay with me in my heart forever. And she's been a wonderful friend and advisor since. And Susan, you've been a tremendous colleague. We've traveled the road. We've had great laughs with one another. And I'm so proud of the work that you continue to do on pushing forth the powers that be on behaving appropriately and diplomatically correct. And I just also quickly want to say thank you to Paige Ennis, my wonderful office mate who put this event together, along with Christina from the Latin America Center and Jason and Catherine for the Resilience Center and the Latin America Center. So to everyone, thank you for all of your work and help here. So diplomacy and protocol started at the age of 2 for me. As Adrienne points out, I was raised in a home where many cultures were celebrated, many languages were spoken, and lots of different food was served. It was my grandmother's home, my Mexican grandmother's home, and we lived in this one half of a duplex. My cousins and uncle and aunt lived next door. And it was like a mini UN. Not only was there the Mexican and Croatian side, but there were our Italian relatives and Lebanese neighbors and our Russian neighbors down the street, all came into Grandma's tiny home and just really enjoyed and celebrated our cultural differences. So for me, I took from that this was a wonderful way to appreciate people of difference and people from around the world. It wasn't always that way. My mom didn't have the creamiest of color skins. My dad spoke with a very, very thick Croatian accent and was sometimes referred to as a displaced person, a dumb DP. So I internalized that discrimination and I carried it forth with me when I was given these amazing postings by both President Clinton and President Obama. And I found wonderful ways then to celebrate the difference as opposed to diving into the difference and educating people about why cultural knowing the differences in cultures and celebrating those cultures and understanding them was so very, very important. And I spend a great deal of time in the book talking about how you can improve that for your business operations and for yourself individually. And as Susan, Ambassador Rice had pointed out, for your children in particularly, so that we can invest in the next generation of US citizens who begin to appreciate more so than ever the differences of those around the world.
Capricia, thank you so much for that. And going back to age 2, I may even go back another 1,000 years from that with my next question. There are many reasons to read this book. Wonderful anecdotes and insights from what Secretary Clinton called behind the curtain. And we'll get to a couple of those. But I also would say that every international relations program, and Ambassador Rice touched on this, perhaps every international relations program is beyond part of the curriculum. You go back to the origins of even the word protocol, which comes from the Greek words that form together mean attach first. Tell us why protocol is so critical. When we read the great stories of things accomplished in diplomacy, you rarely see the detail and protocol that help that out. But why is it so important, and what does attach first mean?
Well, protocol starts the wheels of diplomacy. It does. It creates a very detailed roadmap of every engagement, large or small, for our global leaders. I consider protocol a superpower because it's those micro moves, the details, the nuances that create a major impact on every engagement. I think of the G20 that I accompanied President Obama on for his first meeting with President Putin. There was a lot at stake at this meeting. It was a first meeting as President Putin as president. And we had received from our NSC briefers a detailed description of what was expected to be discussed at this meeting. And so then we took that information and started to put the event together and had in mind exactly how we needed to create the environment for diplomacy to take place, in particularly for it to take place to the advantage of my leader, of my president. All the way down to the size of the room. We selected a room that was a bit cozier because we wanted President Putin to feel forced, literally have his back almost against the wall in these discussions. There were hardline agenda items like Syria, and we didn't want him to feel relaxed and to push back from the conversation. We wanted him to feel pushed in and needed to respond. The ceiling height, even in that room, cooperated. It was lower, and it is been noted that lower ceiling heights force people into more concrete decisions. Well, our roadmap worked. And when the presidents emerged from that bilateral, it was clear that they had come closer together in agreement on many of these very, very important issues. So taking into effect all of those details, all of those micro moves, it had a major impact on that first meeting between these two presidents.
Fantastic. So for people who are listening on one platform or another, if you're on Zoom, you can send your questions in through the Q&A spot, and we'll draw them out as we go along. Or you can send your questions into #AC Protocol, #AC Protocol. And I'll mix some of the questions we're getting in along with my own questions as we go further. One of the wonderful quotes in the book is, "Everyone has skin in this protocol game," meaning this is not just for diplomats, this is for other people as well. Explain to me what you mean by that. A lot of people would think of protocol as one of these discardable niceties when you really just need to get to brass tacks in your lifetimes. But what would be your answer to people like that? And how can this enhance day-to-day life?
Oh, in so many ways. And it was actually the reason why I wrote the book, Fred. After leaving my post, and I shared with Adrienne that I was saddened to see in the out in the business world and organizations, in my own son's community, amongst his friends, that people were having a really hard time connecting. There was this inability to create those strong relationships. And I thought, well, that is what I did every day for the leader of the free world, for the Secretary of State, and making those relationships count. And so that's why I went about to write the book. One of the premises of the core elements of protocol is preparation. There's a whole chapter devoted to it. By preparing, you are creating for yourself an optimistic view because you're seeking out a way to achieve your goals. You are influencing through your preparation. You are influencing the person's opinions. You're influencing the event itself. And also, when you prepare, you de-stress. It calms yourself down because you have a roadmap. In addition to that, though, you could be nimble. So you have your plan, and things don't sometimes go completely according to plan, as I note in the book a couple of times. And so when you go off track, you have that plan to get right back on track again. And I think that's so very important for people in their organizations, business activities, and also their individual lives. Now, I specifically address, Fred, the way that you have created this extraordinary culture at the Atlantic Council. When you're determining how you want to convey who you are, whether it is in the way that I did on behalf of the United States and the President of the United States, or whether it's at the Atlantic Council or your business or even your home, you are sending out information about who you are, and how do you go about doing that is incredibly important. So cultural IQ was essential in the work that I did, and I think it's essential for people in their individual lives and also in businesses and organizations.
Thank you, Capricia. So I'll mix in some questions I'm getting with some of my own as we're going along. I got a few emails last night, Capricia, as people knew I was going to do this today, and a couple of them asked probably what's on the mind of a lot of people on this call at this event, which is sharing us how Presidents Obama and Clinton viewed protocol differently, and perhaps also Secretary Clinton. They're three very different people. So give us some insight into how each of them would prepare and conduct key meetings and moments. One of the quotes from the email was, from somebody who was reading the book, saying this isn't a tell-all book, and that's appropriate from the standpoint of protocol, but maybe she can dish some.
Oh, I love that. Yes. Yeah, there was a line that I did stop at, but in saying that, having served two presidents at the beginning of their administrations was a real honor for me. Not only just an honor, but a wonderful way to invigorate that administration, to make a difference in that administration and the way that the president operates. You know, for presidents, they're new at the game, and there's a little bit of a learning curve. So for President Obama, I will say that because I'd already served 8 years in government in the White House and had already served a president, first lady, I brought with me lots of experience, and I really wanted to share that experience with him immediately from the onset of the administration, and did so. And he was open and welcoming to all of that information. There was a wonderful, one of our first trips was to China, state visit, very important, incredibly important. And at the private dinner that President Hu Jintao held in honor of President Obama, I was approached by my counterpart, my Chinese counterpart, very, very urgently informing me that President Hu wanted President Obama to make a noodle. And I was a little skeptical, but I went over to the president and whispered in his ear, President, who would like you now, sir, to make a noodle? And he gave me this look like I would get to know pretty well. This is our first trip together, so we don't really have a rhythm yet. And I got that look of like, huh, what? But he didn't say anything. Only, is this important? And I assured him that it was, and clapped his hands together, said, all right, then let's make a noodle, and stood shoulder to shoulder and started to bounce this dough and really began to create a stronger relationship with this very important leader that we needed to, with President Hu Jintao and with the Chinese government. So he was all in at the beginning. He was there with me. President Clinton, oh my gosh, an extraordinary curious, wonderful nature. I mean, oftentimes when I was social secretary and I couldn't find him after an event, if I went into the back hallway, he'd be sitting there with the staff, asking them all sorts of questions about, where they're from and their family and how was their work life and home life and all these wonderful. He had just this extraordinary sense of curiosity of people, and then use those stories, use that information in how he developed his agenda. He certainly was someone who cared about advancing the people, the agenda of people across our country, and particularly lifting up those who have very little, if nothing at all. And Hillary, she has empathy in abundance, but understands how to act fast. She's very determined. I think we would all agree with that. As Secretary of State, when there was a crisis point, she immediately acted and got to work on it, brought together advisors, determined exactly, what was the best strategy to take, and then implement it, but then communicated that information with empathy so that people built in her a trust. They trusted her and that she was going to execute this strategy in their favor, in their best interests. So all of them have wonderful characteristics, assets, but working for all three of them, I've got to say, was a dream come true.
What a wonderful answer. Thanks so much. One of your other wonderful quotes in this book, and I just have been loving reading the book.
I'm so glad.
Finished my copy last evening. Protocol miscues are red meat. That meaning for the media. You remind us of President Trump's saluting of the North Korean general, which is not done. You remind us of George W. Bush's neck massage of the shocked Chancellor Angela Merkel. Most of all, and I'd forgotten about this, President Jimmy Carter's kiss of Queen Elizabeth II on her mouth, or as you put it, on period, her period. So such a great read. So with these miscues as red meat in mind, what was your worst protocol moment and how did you handle it?
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, they do happen, and when I gather with the former chiefs of protocol, we get together once or twice a year. We love to share our war stories, and I have to say that mine rises probably to the top. This was during the UN General Assembly. When there's so much activity happening between the president's agenda and his schedule and the secretary's schedule, we are just working round the clock. At this particular UN General Assembly, the president also decided to host the ASEAN leaders. And so we had another enormous event, basically a mini summit within the time frame of the assembly. So our team was again working around the clock. We had accepted a little bit of help from an outsider, a team member of the White House, but someone who was going to help us post the flags. Never did that again. Posting flags is incredibly important, and particularly in protocol. The symbolism of the flag gives the statement of that country. It is imperative to make sure that those flags fly appropriately. And in this occasion, regrettably, the flag of the Philippines did not. One of the protocol officers informed me that not only had the flag been posted wrong, when it was inverted, it symbolized that the Philippines was at war. So I saw from afar the NSC members barreling towards me with the ambassador of the Philippines right beside them. And I knew I had to A, act fast, change that flag out, and then B, make my apologies immediately, of which I did both. And then lastly, I had to make my apologies to my president, who looked at me and said, I do understand, Capricia, but this will never happen again, right? And I assured him it certainly would not. And it never, ever did.
Thank you for sharing that story. Lots and lots of questions coming in. in the book, you talk about a seating arrangement between President Obama and then Russian President Medvedev during the signing of the New START Treaty in 2010. Tell us a little bit more about that diplomatic faux pas, potentially, how you prevented it, and then what we can learn from such gestures in our daily lives.
Well, there are so many elements that come together with protocol and how we create that foundation for diplomacy to take place. You know, before the president walks into a room, it is my job to make sure that that environment is set appropriately for the interaction that's about to take place, but also, again, appropriately for my president. And in this instance, when there was the signing of the START treaty, the New START treaty between President Medvedev and President Obama, the stage had been set. Everyone had learned their logistics. But when we looked at the stage, it was clear to us that even though the chairs were of the same height, that once my very, very tall president and the rather much shorter President Medvedev sat in them, it would look like teacher and student. And one of the most important elements of diplomacy and in protocol is to create parity. And in particularly in these situations where it's a coming together, an agreement, a signing, a sealing of a deal as they move forward. To have had that disparity would have been a visual signal that would not have worked well, certainly in Russia, but all over the world. And so what we did was we took another chair and we sawed off some of the legs of that chair, the bits on the bottom, and the team in the Czech Republic were amazing. They put them onto President Medvedev's chair, so it raised him up just enough so that the two of them appeared to be equals. And we avoided, I think, a rather significant diplomatic snafu.
That's just a wonderful, wonderful anecdote. So I don't know who the protocol officer was for Vladimir Putin that convinced him to put his ferocious dog in the room with the dog-hating Chancellor Merkel. But I think that sort of leads to, I'm seeing in the chat, in the questions, a little bit of skepticism. So I'd like you to answer them. One of them is from a student in Germany, Maximilian Shaletsky. He says, protocol is often seen as a waste of money and ineffective. What is your personal response to that, and how do diplomats balance hard and soft power? Greetings from Germany. I mean, obviously, there are people who say when you're dealing with very difficult people in the room, does protocol really help you with that? The other question related to that, Maria Brizuela de Avila says, protocol is taken by many as rigid laws that have come even above the conversations they stage to simply be correct. How can being flexible with protocol favor our final pursuit? And that goes with another question. Does a leader have to pierce protocol? And have you seen that happen for effect?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So around the world we just went. That was fantastic. The beauty of virtual. I love it. Protocol is not of the past. It is essential. What we intend to do and what we do is invest in that relationship. We make sure that there is an investment between the counterparts, and then we use our tools while we're creating that engagement that shows signs of respect. And that is essential in diplomacy. You must have respect and civility in understanding, because you're coming usually at the table with completely opposite opinions, completely opposite ways of wanting to solve an issue or to move forward in the relationship. So you're trying to converge and bring close the gap, if you will. And while doing that, then you're creating a trust. If these leaders do not have a trust in the relationship with one another, they will never come together. They must understand and acknowledge that that there is a mutual respect, that has developed into this trusting relationship. So now I know that my policy initiatives are being received by you. You are considering them, and perhaps we will find that crossroads that will bring us closer together. So there's never going to be a dusty jacket, if you will, on the tools of protocol. And the differentiation between hard power and soft power, hard power is where we're using our economic or military might. And we try to avoid that by first using soft power. And there's so many wonderful tools, public diplomacy and food diplomacy, all of these wonderful tools that I was able to use in my job and that I describe in detail in the book are useful in really pushing that relationship forward, bringing those individuals closer together. And so, there's Joe Nye also, he did coin the phrase on soft power. He also coined the phrase on smart power, which is the use of both hard and soft power. And I witnessed President Obama and Secretary Clinton use it incredibly effectively, in particularly with those relationships that we were having a more difficult time with, like our Russian counterparts and our Chinese counterparts on many occasions. I think I answered everything. Did I, Fred?
Those were great. And I'll try not to throw so many at you one time, but there's just some great questions here. Another grouping of questions revolves around, the question of being a woman, the question of being an American. So from Bonnie Ben Hayon, have you had experiences where cultural differences created conflicts with protocol? And I know in your book you have a rich section where you talk about the differences of Americans, that sometimes our easygoing and an informal way doesn't work so well, and sometimes it doesn't. So that would be one thing, the American uniqueness. And then also Bonnie is saying, for example, women aren't seen as equals and might not be welcomed at a meeting or would be required differently than they would be normally. So within those cultural differences, how does one navigate that?
Well, I have always advocated, again, being prepared, doing your homework, doing your research, and understanding those cultural differences before you travel. Bringing with us our Americanism, if you will, sometimes can be a deficit. When you are in a country that has a different manner of greeting or has a different manner of eating even. You should know all of those. That's empowering when you sit down, because they realize that the person that you're working with, the person that you're dealing with, realizes, boy, you've really taken the time to get to know me. You understand that this is my home country and frankly, then their cultural rules. So important to do that. Even more so important to do so with gender. Understanding the rules and regulations of the social conduct within a country for a woman is also very empowering. But you shouldn't defer. You should not delegate away your position. If you should be seated at the table. Absolutely make certain that they know that you should be seated at the table, but should your head maybe possibly covered, then you should acknowledge that. Ask in advance. Ask our embassy. Ask the person that you're working with to give you guidelines on social conduct, so that you're prepared when you walk into that room, and it isn't something that you're having to manage while you're also managing who you are and your position at the table and in that business meeting. I have a whole section, I wrote an entire chapter on negotiating while female in the book, because I know that all of the rules that I wrote in the first 14 chapters apply to everyone, but there's some tools that would be specifically helpful for women alone.
Well, let's build on those. Let's go to those because that also goes along with other questions here. We have a question from Miranda Barrett, sharing more about your career path that led you to these prestigious positions and what advice you'd have for young people. interest in this path from other people. I've asked for advice, particularly for young women wanting to get started in the world. So talk a little bit about the special rules you have in that chapter, but also perhaps you can also give some career advice.
Yes. So I was incredibly fortunate to have had a mentor in Secretary Clinton at a very young age. I met her on the road while I was working on President Clinton's campaign, and I sort of attached myself to her coattails and didn't let go. My first piece of advice for women in particular, this is for both sexes, of course, but for all rather. But for women, I would say, it's really important to find that mentor who is sitting on a branch just above where you are, because they see things, they have a different viewpoint, they have a different perspective. They will offer you judgment without being judgmental. They will invest in you. They will share their resources with you. And I was very fortunate to have someone who did that just for me, and continue to have wonderful mentors. I consider, Fred, you amongst them. So both men and women. And it's really, really helpful. Also, find a position where there are support systems for you. I was lucky in that as well. In the Clinton administration, I had my son the last year of the administration, and the Clintons made it, President and Mrs. Clinton made the White House work for many of us. There were 4 of us who were pregnant at the same time. There was definitely something in the water on Mrs. Clinton's staff. And they just made it work. They pulled out Chelsea's crib. They would send over, make sure I had enough broccoli to eat when I was working late, shush me home to make sure that I was getting enough rest, things of that sort. It was incredibly nurturing environment. So finding those support systems that is incredibly helpful in your workplace. And lastly, I would say is there are some tools that you can use. Making sure that if your voice is not heard, this is something that we also used in the Clinton White House. If our voices were not heard at the table, and there were 2 of us sitting at that table, we would repeat what our female counterpart, our colleague rather, would say at the table. So if they made a point and for some reason no one heard what they said, and John said the exact same thing, and for some reason everybody heard John, I would repeat what Sally said again and again, say, wow, did everybody hear what Sally just said? She made such a great point. Sally, do you want to make that point again? And repeating it and having that sort of echo effect was incredibly effective in making sure that our voices were always heard. I continue to use that tool today.
Capricia, that's just terrific. As I read through the book, very often in the chapter you would have bulleted points, and they were the points where you were teaching us, and you've just given a few of the great lessons that are in the book. Explain to our listeners why protocol doesn't hold when the President of the United States meets with the Queen of England or the Emperor of Japan, because I would think you should bow. And I certainly would bow as low as anyone told me to do, but the President of the United States isn't supposed to do that, right? So explain to us why the President will not bow to the Queen of England and the Emperor of Japan.
Because he is the leader of our nation, and we do not ever succumb to nor bow to the leader of another nation, another chief of state. He is to hold his own. Now you can acknowledge the greeting. So if you are in the presence of Her Majesty, a nod of the head. Additionally, the same thing with the Emperor, a nod of the head suffices. But a full-on bow is completely inappropriate for the president to take. And actually, it was a lesson that a few former chiefs of protocol also learned when they were posted in the UK, when they were visiting in the UK, and they had made a curtsy that was very, very, very low. They were chastised in the U.S. press because, again, there's this little war that we fought to separate ourselves from the mother country a while ago, and we hold that dear. But I adore Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. I think that she is a spectacular example of leadership and of longevity that has been a wonderful shining light on how to do protocol appropriately and to diplomatically avoid any pitfall that comes your way.
Thank you for that. And any of us who are watching The Crown right now know exactly what you're talking about regarding Queen Elizabeth II. There's questions. A question in the Q&A about gifts, and one of the most endearing moments of the book was when Queen Elizabeth II received a gift that was in respect for her father, King George VI. Tell us about that, but in a larger sense. We obviously have restrictions in the United States about the taking of gifts. Can it be sometimes dangerous to take it, and how do you handle that? And that's also in the questions. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Well, gifts, I think, is one of the most effective soft power tools that we have in protocol and diplomacy. It can evoke so many emotions. It is filled with meaning. Just the simple extension of that gift can help to, again, bridge that relationship, close that gap. I was tenacious in looking for the just right gift on behalf of President and Mrs. Obama, and for Secretaries Clinton and Kerry. I think I kind of drove them a little crazy with my gift memos, but you wanted to make sure that it hit the right tone for that particular occasion. And when Her Majesty invited President and Mrs. Obama over for a state visit, I knew that all eyes were going to be on this gift. In particularly because this exchange was leader to leader, as we call it, not protocol to protocol. So everyone was going to see it. Personally, the president was extending the gift, and Her Majesty receiving and extending her own. So on this wonderful day, when Her Majesty was making her way over to the gift tables, and she really is sort of her own chief of protocol. She looks at her watch. She sort of scoots the president along. Come along, Mr. President. I shouldn't imitate Her Majesty, but I just can't help myself. And she looked at the gifts that we had presented. She just was taken. It was a leather portfolio with memorabilia from her father's last visit to the United States. And as she moved page to page and was looking at every item, I want to say that I saw a little glisten of a tear in her eye as she looked up at the president and thanked him. And he looked at me, and I was standing right next to him, beaming like, okay, Capricia, great job, great job. And then we moved on to the next gift, which was to Prince Philip. She said, oh, Philip, come over and see what they got your carriage ponies. And what we had done, we learned that he likes to race carriage ponies. But we have an artisan from Ohio and Colorado created these bits and shanks for his carriage ponies. And on the ends, we soldered the president's seal. And so we presented them this beautiful box, and he walked over, and he was a little skeptical at first, like, were these going to work or not? And so then Her Majesty calls over the head of the horses. He looks at them, and he's just like, oh, no, this is fine workmanship. Excellent. She looks at him like, I told you, Philip. It was really a wonderful moment. But I'll tell you that, like, just moments after this unveiling of the gifts, the British press announced that the Americans get it right. So gifts can either go really well, and that was it. That was the punctuation mark, and then they moved on. Or if they had gone horribly wrong, it would have marred the entire visit. It would have been the focus of the visit, as opposed to the development of this special relationship and making it even more special, which the gift did do. It would have then been the focus of the goof, of the miss, of the blunder. And you want to avoid that, of course, at all costs. In the United States, as you point out, Fred, we do have restrictions on what we can accept from our foreign counterparts. And the president has, I believe right now it's $390. Above that amount, then if they want to keep the gift, they actually have to pay for that gift. Or else it goes then to the GSA and eventually to the president's archives.
Thank you very much for that, Capricia. So this gets to the question of how protocol changes. So Henry Ola asks a loaded question: does protocol change depending on the administration? And Matt Erlandson from Chile says, how do you, from the professional perspective, deal with presidents or head of government who do not comply with protocols or rather go their own way? For example, by frequently speaking from outside the speech script, cutting the line, or some occasions that could even imply a problem in bilateral or multilateral relations. Great questions about about how it plays out and what could be very, very important international situations.
Yes. Well, protocol does not change from country to country, nor does it change from administration to administration. I gathered in 2011 all the chiefs of protocol from around the world. It was well over 100 for a global chiefs of protocol conference at the State Department. And I talk about why that was important. We wanted to all be on the same page. We all wanted to make sure that we were leading our presidents or prime ministers in some instances in the direction that was clear, because that's what protocol does. It provides clarity of operation, of logistics, and of purpose. And so you always wanted to make sure that these movements were very, very clear. And so we shared best practices, and then we also determined things like, where is the position of honor? Is it on the right or on the left? There were a couple of times when we would do a little bit of a dance in some countries. We all came to the affirmed belief it was always on the right. So when a leader then misses protocol, perhaps not receiving appropriate briefings, not attending to those briefings if they are given, not following the advice that they're given, it's showing a disrespect. It's showing a disrespect to your counterpart, and it creates a very confusing moment. Exactly what you want to avoid. You want there to be clarity. You want to be fully prepared. You want to be in an environment that is going to set forth your foreign policy agenda. You do not want to be dealing with, is it the right or the left? Who's first, who's second? All of those details should have been well ironed out. And so by following the protocols, you are enhancing your foreign policy goals and certainly moving towards a greater agreement with your counterpart.
Capricia, we're into the last few minutes. Let's see how many questions we can get in here. There are a lot. A good follow-up question on the question of the emperor and the queen, which is, what about, let's do this one quickly, what about the first lady? Is she supposed to bow for the queen?
She does not. I also advise that she does not bow. That again, I advised on a tilt of the head, and it was regrettable. I saw that there was some news points that had stated that Mrs. Trump had abused protocol, and she had not at all. She had abided by proper protocol with Her Majesty.
Thank you so much. A few questions about our time.
But Fred, can I tell you one thing?
Oh,
so
please.
with Her Majesty, there was one piece of protocol that I did not abide by. So there's an arrival ceremony when you first arrive to Buckingham Palace, and I was standing by with my protocol counterparts, and you, as an officer, you're trying to merge into the wall. You don't want to be seen. So Her Majesty and Prince Philip, accompanied by the President and Mrs. Obama, they're about to go out onto the lawn and to have the arrival ceremony. But I noticed Her Majesty was carrying her handbag, and I thought, oh my goodness, well, Her Majesty should not be carrying her handbag, because in our country, I immediately always take, a woman's handbag so that she's not encumbered by it. Well, I turned to my counterpart, my protocol counterpart from Buckingham Palace, and I just simply said, oh, Her Majesty's handbag. And I took a small step forward, and he held me back, and he said, do not touch the bag. And I was like, oh my goodness, okay, sure, I won't touch the bag. And I said, he goes, we never touch the bag. I said, oh my goodness, okay, well, what's in the bag? And he said, we don't know what's in the bag, but we never touch the bag. So that everyone should know, proper protocol in the UK, never touch Her Majesty's bag.
Well, we're on the record, Capricia. You still can't tell us what's in the bag, right?
I can't tell you what's in the bag, but what I did hear was that she probably has a cell phone in there to call her grandchildren on, and that just makes me adore her even more.
Oh, that's wonderful. Bayan Rahman from KRG. So we've got people here from all over the place. This is global event. How will COVID-19 impact diplomatic protocol? And obviously you have handshakes in there, you have different things that you're supposed to do. How do you kiss on each side of the cheek, and what there's just wonderful detail throughout this book. But obviously that's all different now. So, and also in the digital world, there's certain digital protocols. So what are your answers there?
Well, we are now evolving, but this is again where protocol, the frame of protocol, the purpose of protocol is really important. Being prepared, doing your research, communicating your expectations appropriately, all very important in this new time that we are living in. I'm actually seeing that maybe I've got a follow-up book developing right now, Fred. So being prepared, research the rules and regulations of your state, the country, what phase are they open in, making sure then that people know if they're coming to your home or to your business, is it BYOM, bring your own mask, will you be providing masks, making sure that you have these things on hand as a guest. Asking, in advance, be very considerate about asking in advance, will I be expected to behave in a certain way? When you arrive, should you remove your shoes at someone's place to their home? And then, how you also communicate in that invitation. It sets those expectations so that people feel more comfortable. It's, again, trying to navigate this fog. Protocol helps you do it. It brings clarity to all of those engagements.
So I'm going to put in before I close and you close, there's a sweet question from a fellow Croatian American, and I really want to get this in because I know how much you care about mentoring and how much you care at the Atlantic Council about helping people with their own lives and careers. So first of all, it's Anna Maria, and I'm going to mispronounce this, it's Sisenica. It's thank you for your career and service, Ms. Marshall. Greetings from a law student and fellow Croatian American in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Do you have a favorite memory from Croatia or from your Croatian American heritage?
Oh, yes, I do. And also, I have to say, Fred, my father would have been very proud of the way you pronounce Penavic as opposed to Penavic. I carry in my heart forever the memory of my father, who just recently passed away. But he brought to my life and my brothers and my son this deep appreciation for the Croatian culture. And we traveled back there to visit my baba and dida so many times. Kako si. And I had the opportunity to travel back with my son and my husband, with my father leading the way. And that's probably my greatest, my fondest memory was the 2 weeks that we spent from traveling from Split, going to Hvar, to then making our way to Dubrovnik, and then up into my family's home in Širki Brijeg, just outside of Mostar, so really into Bosnia-Herzegovina. And meeting and being with my family, eating the tremendous, delicious food, drinking probably a little too much pivo. It was a wonderful opportunity where my father shared these stories with my son, showed him the path of his youth, and visiting this culture and a piece of my personal history. So now it lives on in him. Now that my father has gone, my son will continue to carry that torch forward. And we promise to return to Croatia many times. It is a beautiful country.
What a wonderful answer. As you know, Capricia, I'm the son of German immigrants, and for all the first generation Americans on this line or immigrants on this line, thank you for this country the way you are. In closing, I just want to say that what we say at the Atlantic Council when we can't quite figure something out, and you mentioned Paige Ennis, and Paige and I very often say this to each other, which is, what would Capricia do? I was delighted to see that there was an appendix to this book that actually captures the most important lessons of the book in an appendix of what would Capricia do. So you now will also know the secrets that everyone at the Atlantic Council has been able to profit from. I also want to end with a quote and then pass back to you if there's anything you want to say in closing. And this is a quote that says everything about the book, but also everything about Capricia Marshall. And that is, in general, you can't go wrong when you operate from the principle, be gracious to everyone. This is a woman who's gracious to everyone and goes through life with a little bit something different and extra that we all admire. So Capricia, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Thanks to everybody for the great questions you've been sending in, and buy the book, read the book.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you so very much for this opportunity. To everyone at the Atlantic Council for your support and constant friendship. I look forward to the time when we're all back together again very soon.